Hello and welcome to a special episode of This Week at the Movies. Eric and I will be off this weekend, a little bit of a change in our schedule. We will be back next Saturday, which is December 14th. But there are a lot of new movies coming out this weekend, so I thought I would pop on for a special quick edition as you get ready to head into the weekend of a whole bunch of things that are now available that you can check out. So let's dive in. First up, among the releases coming to theaters this week is the film Nightbitch. This is the latest from writer-director Marielle Heller. It's starring Amy Adams, and it opens obviously tomorrow wide. The film centers on a stay at home mom, played by Amy Adams, who struggles with regret for the art career and the adult connections that she sort of left behind. Her husband, played by Scoot McNairy, doesn't really understand his wife's struggles or just how much she does taking care of their son. Soon enough, our heroine also begins to note some changes, causing her to fear that she might actually be turning into a dog. Now, this is an interesting film, an interesting concept. It has a lot to say about motherhood and the isolation that women can feel when they get pigeonholed into a certain role. Adams gives a very courageous and fearless performance, and I think Heller has some nice visual sequences and some really nice moments here that reflect on some important things to consider as a society. But this is a decidedly somewhat strange story, and it's definitely not going to work for everyone. I'm not the target demographic either. There are moments I thought overall the narrative was a little awkward, and despite a good performance and the craft of the film, it's a little bit of an interesting swing, but it didn't completely work for me. It may work better for you. I'm giving this one 2.5 stars out of 5. As I mentioned, this one is in theaters on Friday. Next up, we have The Order. This new thriller is based on true events and the nonfiction book The Silent Brotherhood. The film comes from writer-director Justin Kurzel, and it focuses on a white supremacist group called The Order that uses a string of high-profile heists in the Pacific Northwest to fund their operations. Jude Law stars as Terry Husk, a veteran FBI agent who has taken a new post in Idaho that's supposed to be a little bit quieter, but he notices a pattern in a series of events that draws his attention, and he teams with a green local deputy played by Ty Sheridan and begins tracking a local group led by the charismatic Bob Matthews, who's played by Nicholas Hoult. It all leads to an eventual showdown. This is a well-crafted kind of crime drama. I like the period setting. All the events take place in the early 1980s, but it feels like a timely story, even though it covers a group that conducted its operations 40 years ago. Sheridan and Holt give strong performances, but I particularly liked Law in the lead role. Kurzel does a nice job of bringing the story to life and adding tension to the events. I also quite like the look of the film. I think this is one that is worth seeking out in theaters. It is another wide release. I'm giving it 3.5 out of 5 stars. Well, keeping with the weekend theme and also the dog theme, we have another film, Werewolves, that is opening in limited release starting tomorrow. Imagine, if you will, The Purge, but with people turning into werewolves instead. That is basically what we have with this new film that stars Frank Grillo. In the film, a supermoon a year prior led to people all over the globe transforming suddenly into werewolves. More than 1 billion people died. In the year since the event, scientists led by Lou Diamond Phillips have worked to curb the danger. The next supermoon is upon us, and people are preparing for another onslaught. Grillo stars as a former soldier assigned to protect the frontline scientists, while also trying to keep his sister-in-law and niece safe. Once the sun drops, chaos ensues. This is a potentially clever idea, and it reminded me in the setup a little bit of the idea of The Purge, right down to the announcement at the beginning of it all that all emergency services would be suspended during the overnight time period. The action sequences are fine. The creature design is a little rough. Ultimately, the story drags at times. This feels very much like a B monster movie. There are also some stiff performances in here that don't help a whole lot. It will probably appeal most to those who are diehard fans of the genre. As I mentioned, it is out now in limited release starting tomorrow. I gave it 1.5 out of 5 stars. Next up, we have the indie drama Oh Canada. This one comes from writer-director Paul Schrader. It finds Richard Gere as a famous documentary filmmaker who is struggling with terminal cancer. Despite protests from his wife, who's played by Uma Thurman, he has decided to give a candid interview to another documentarian played by Michael Imperioli, who wants to share his life story. The problem is our main character, Leonard Fife, has trouble keeping the facts straight, especially after living with lies most of his life. We see his early life play out in flashbacks with Jacob Elordi as a young Leonard, while the contemporary version struggles to get out the truth before it's too late. The film has a strong cast and an interesting concept. Schrader is a very seasoned writer and director who's done some very interesting work. Here, despite a performance from Gere that I liked, it just doesn't quite work. I struggled to connect to Leonard and the story here. The bouncing around through time with an unreliable narrator made the plot a little bit hard to follow at times. It's a solid swing, but it was something of a miss for me. Oh Canada is out in limited release this weekend. I gave it 2 stars out of 5. Next up, another indie film. This one, Lake George. It's a new crime caper that comes from writer-director Jeffrey Reiner. He is probably best known for working on the small screen on series like Awake and The Affair and High Fidelity. Here he comes with the story of a crime gone wrong. It feels like a little bit of something out of a Coen Brothers film or maybe a season of Fargo. We meet Don, played by Shea Wiggum, who is a failed criminal just out of prison with no money and no prospects. He goes to a former employer named Armin, played by Glenn Flesher, who owes him money, but instead of getting the money he wants, he's tasked with killing Armin's former mistress, Phyllis, who is played by Carrie Coon. But you know what? Don is no killer. When he comes face to face with Phyllis, he quite literally cannot pull the trigger. So Phyllis convinces him to go on a spree to snag all of Armin's loot instead. Look, I like a good crime story, and I like a project that features Carrie Coon. So this has both. It was right in my wheelhouse. She and Wiggum make for a fun pairing on screen, and their journey through this film has its moments. It is best when it's really focusing on the two of them and some of their mishaps. It follows a fairly typical pattern for crime caper gone wrong, but it works in its own way. Reiner does a nice job of putting it together, and he gets that good pairing with Carrie Coon and Shea Wiggum. I had some fun with this one. It's coming out on VOD this weekend, so you can look for it. I gave it 2.5 stars out of 5. Not a bad little crime caper. If you're looking for something on streaming or the small screen, look no further than the latest from the Star Wars universe. Skeleton Crew is here. This one has a unique set of characters in a unique corner of the Star Wars galaxy. That alone makes it interesting. It comes from Christopher Ford and John Watts, who also directed the pilot. That is a duo that teamed up on Spider-Man Homecoming. This feels like more of a young person's tale, focusing on a group of kids who make a discovery on their home planet that leads them on an adventure. It takes place after the events of Return of the Jedi, but it doesn't really require you to know anything about the Skywalker saga to enjoy the journey here. This series has some good adult actors, including Jude Law and Carrie Condon. Both play more of a supporting role in the first 2 episodes, which were released on Monday. This feels a lot more like Goonies than probably your typical Star Wars tale, and I mean that in a great way. The kid actors do a nice job. I like the look and feel of the first 2 episodes. Subsequent episodes will drop weekly on Disney Plus on Tuesdays. For fans of Star Wars and fun action series, this is definitely going to be worth a look. Like I said, the first 2 episodes are now out on Disney Plus, and Skeleton Crew streams new episodes Tuesdays on Disney Plus. Before I get out of here, one more streaming release, this one getting ready to drop to us on Tuesday, and that is the new film Gunner. It's an action film that stars Luke Hemsworth and Morgan Freeman, so that probably catches your interest, as it did mine. But don't get your hopes up too high. The plot centers on a former Special Forces super soldier named Lee Gunner, who is played by Hemsworth, who returns home, wants to reconnect with his sons. He takes them on a camping trip with an old buddy, and they stumble on a drug lab in the woods, like you do, and a firefight ensues, and his kids are taken captive. The cops want to blame it on Lee, but he manages to break free, connects with the kingpin who runs it all, a guy named Riker, who's in prison, played by Morgan Freeman. It's Riker's son, who had been running things on the outside, now has Lee's kids. So he kind of goes on a one-man mission to get the kids back and to end the operation of this gang for good. We've seen this kind of a plot set up before. We have an operator with a special set of skills whose family is in danger. Hemsworth, who is the brother of Chris and Liam, plays it very well. I've liked him in other things I've seen. He's this affable leading man. Fremont is also not the type of actor you typically see in a film like this, or kind of an ceremonious role like this one, but the film is really at its best when you have these two together. They spend a little bit of time in a car debating back and forth. That was the part I liked the best. Most of the film, though, is cliched and over the top villains and action sequences. If you want to see some shooting and some explosions, this one will be for you. It drops on VOD on December 9th. I gave it 1.5 stars out of 5. So despite a couple of interesting leads, it just didn't do a lot for me. Whew. That is a lot. That doesn't even cover every single thing that is out this week. The new movie Y2K from A24, the horror comedy, also drops this weekend. I have yet to see that one, hoping to check it out. I think Eric and I will probably circle back and touch on that a little bit. We will also be talking about Lord of the Rings, War of the Rohirrim, which debuts on Friday, December 13th, and that'll be on our new episode, which will be on Saturday, December 14th. Until then, you guys have a great weekend. Good to catch up with you. Hope you guys find something fun to watch at the theaters.